friends. My name is Alex Karekis, and I want to welcome you to segment 2 of our 3-part series, Trek into the Plain of Jars in the country of Laos. Now in segment 1, we trekked to a place called Ba Nang, or sometimes commonly referred to as Jar Site Number 1, near the town of Phonsavan. Now when we trekked through this monolithic jar site, we asked ourselves, what is the source of these jars? Well, research conducted here at Jar Site Number 1 has shown that the origin of the jars at this location come from a quarry located at Phou Keng mountain. Well, when I arrived to Phou Keng, I was greatly surprised to find out that the quarry is simply a series of loose boulders that lie adjacent to a ravine that works its way up to the top of the mountain. And when I arrived at the top, I found another surprise. There was a secret North Vietnamese Army tunnel complex right there on the top. I tell you, there are many twists and turns to this tale in the Plain of Jars, and I invite you to come journey with me because I know today is going to be an exciting trek. Well, as I ascend the mountain here, known as the Phou Keng quarry site, I start to realize that these boulders here are what were used to carve the jars. Now there are some jars over here that are unfinished, and there's a fine example right over here. You see this jar directly ahead of us? Let's go towards it. Let's go examine it, and we'll see why it's in an unfinished state. Okay, over here you can see that it's been shaped into its round form, so to speak. But look at this. The jar ends about 5 inches below the lip. Let's take a look. Now the interesting thing about this unfinished jar is that you can see some of the craftsmanship used to etch out this giant boulder. So this is a really good example of a jar at a quarry site that has been left unfinished. The reasons are lost to time, and we're so fortunate to be able to see it. Well, as I examine this hillside, which is also part of a quarry site, right there in front of us, I see a jar that lays unfinished. Let's go up there and examine it. Let me point it out to you there. It's right directly ahead of us, right there. So I'll climb this hill and let's go examine it. Now here directly ahead of us is this unfinished jar. You have to ask yourself, what happened here? Why does it lie unfinished? Well, I think sometimes with this type of work, you know, the fracturing process overtakes the carving process. You can see over here that for some reason, as they were carving inside the jar over here, this piece here fractured. Now, what's interesting about this jar is normally what we see is linear lines, okay, lines that go like this along the side and the bottom that shows the carving process. But right over here, look at this. These are points. It's as if they had some kind of like a, let's call it a crowbar or rebar, where they were pounding into the stone and chipping it away. And then maybe later on they would shape it by taking another tool along its side. I tell you, this is really fabulous. As I was examining these wonderful jars right here, I looked up the hill right over there. Right up there, I see a boulder that has a round configuration. It is not the same like anything else we see up around here. I believe that that boulder up there that has that round shape right there is the beginnings of a jar. And so let's take a trek up there. Let's see if we can confirm that that boulder up there is a jar in progress, just like these two were over here. Let me show you something that I just came upon. Right over there, can you see it? Right over here, this white spot here, this white point, so to speak. There it is, right there. That, my friends, is part of a mortar round. It could be live, it could be inert, I don't know. But as I said, danger lurks all around us here in this beauty. Many a people step on these and end up losing their lives and their limbs. I'll tell you, it's an exciting journey, but there's a danger to it. You are seeing exactly what I am. We're on this journey together. My goodness, this is beautiful. Look, this boulder right over here has been shaped into a circular pattern. You can see it right over here. But look at this. They never went beyond shaping the exterior of the boulder. You can see the strike marks over here as they started working on the boulder, never finishing it. I don't know why. The reason has been lost in time, but this is still a beautiful piece to take a look at. If you examine this boulder, you can actually see the work, the tool marks on the boulder to shape it. Look at these over here. These over here are made by a tool. You can see right over here the strike points right over here. This is the outer surface right here. Look at here. You can see the strike points right over here to start shaping it. And as you go down, you can see the linear marks over here, right over here, these linear marks as they're working their way around the boulder. And again, you can see the strike points over here to take out the outer layer right over here. I'll tell you, this is really beautiful. Another fascinating thing about these jars in this quarry site is these jars, once they were built here, had to be transported miles and miles away. I'll tell you, it seems to me a Herculean task. How they did it is beyond our knowledge. seems to widen here. Right here where we're standing, right here, it's just a little beyond shoulder length. I think it's about 3 feet apart. But right here, it's a double length, which is 5 to 6 feet. So the tunnel becomes larger. Well, let's follow it and see where it leads us. Well, look at this. This is pretty interesting. This looks like some type of barrier here, and I don't know when it was put here. Some type of room. And look at this over here. It has the numbers 2676, and then it looks like 4/5. But look at this over here. You can see the top of the tunnel right there. Well, I tell you, one of the interesting things, when you look at this construction, you can see it's concrete and rebar poured. So this was all done by hand. Every sandbag, every rebar, look at this right over here, was hand carried up this mountain. This tunnel dug in this cave, and then this cement poured. I tell you, it's a Herculean effort. It wasn't done with any equipment. This was done with blood, sweat, and tears. I tell you, this is really fascinating when you see the determination of men once they want to achieve some type of task. Well, look at this over here. Is there another room here? Okay, another area that leads into a room that maybe they could have extended the tunnel, but they stopped right over here. Well, as I said, this journey here into this cave is very fascinating. We're back now in a thin section of the tunnel. It's not too wide. I'd say it extends about 2 feet beyond my shoulders. But still, after having walked through this tunnel, I could see where many people, men, equipment, and supplies could be stored in this complex. Before we exit this tunnel, let me show you another interesting configuration. See this metal frame and these hinges over here? Well, this is what's called a blast door. So when an air raid was going on, both these doors at both ends of the tunnel would be closed shut, so that if a bomb fell nearby, the concussion would not be able to work its way into the tunnel and possibly kill the people inside. Friends, the trek up this mountain to explore these VC secret tunnels was very difficult. It's a high summit up here. But I tell you what, now that I've walked through this cave, it was really worth it. I've had a lot of fun coming up here, and I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me.
Cánh đó cú lò của mùa trên gió cho kế ua lùa dân tu thấu ua thấu lo mùa cho từ nó ta xua cánh tràn rò cha yua gió lùa nó để hay mong thấu đó cú khó xia cha đun đi chín ra cả ia pe mong nhớ pe to trông cha miền nó chỉ nó xua ta xuam lông che yua plo ru ru.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this trek that we've taken to the Phou Keng quarry site. Thus far, there's been about 15 quarry sites identified here in a plain of jars. Now, one of the questions that often arises is how were these jars formed? How were they made, and what tools were used? Well, we can look at the development of mankind's history with respect to tool development into 4 periods. The first period is the Stone Age, and then came the Copper and the Bronze Age, and finally the Iron Age. And so it was with the advent of metals that allowed man to build these beautiful monolithic jars that we find scattered around the plain of jars. Now you ask yourself, how old, how long ago were metals discovered? Well, metals were discovered in different continents at different periods. However, we know that in China, the advent or the use of metals goes back at least maybe 6,000 years. Now we also know that from an excavation of a burial site next to a jar, there were human bone fragments found, and those were dated to be at least 3,500 years old. However, testing of charcoal in a pit near one of these jars revealed that the charcoal was at least 9,000 years old. So as you can see, mankind lived in this area for many thousands of years. Well, friends, from here we're going to trek to a site commonly referred to as Jar Site number 2 near the village of Ban Nakeo. Just entered site number 2. So this is the final leg. I don't know where this road will eventually lead me to. One of the things about these areas, there's not too many signs. But anyways, this is what makes the journey so exciting. I don't know what lies one step ahead of me. Well, as I was going up the dirt road, I saw this brick pathway, and next to the brick pathway I saw this symbol over here, MAG. Now this is the group that is clearing the ammunition and the bombs from these sites. So I figure I'm on the right track, although I'm not exactly sure. As I said, there are no signs here. But as I looked up here, coming to the crest, at this beautiful tree over here, I noticed a series of beautiful jars. I'll tell you, this is exciting. Well, there you have it. This is site number 2. Boy, I tell you, these are really big jars. Look at this one over here, long and tubular, but it looks like it fell down on its side. Well, as I was examining this large jar and trying to figure out why it was laying on its side, I think I solved the mystery. Look at this tree over here. It probably was very small at the time that the jar was placed over here, because look what I noticed. As I came around, of course, I see all these roots over here, but look at this. Here is a jar incorporated in the tree roots and trunk. You can see right over here the cut marks, or the striations, so to speak, but right over there you can see the opening to the jar. So I speculate that this here at one time was upright, and as this tree grew over the last 100 or several hundred years, the roots actually toppled this large stone jar. Friends, look at this. This is fantastic. Here's another case of where a tree grew somehow or another from the inside of this fantastic jar, and it split it open. Look at this. Perhaps the jar had a small hole at the bottom, and there was a seedling that fell inside the jar and grew and sprouted into a large tree. Because look at this over here. Here's part of a jar that's been incorporated into the tree trunk. But look at this, you can actually see the split. This is really fantastic. My goodness, look at this. You don't often see nature overtaking these jars, but look at this. We have a great witness to history before our very eyes. go down there and take a look at this tank. I tell you, this is fascinating. Well, this looks like the exhaust area. Up front, where the turn is the front. So the engine must have been laying in this area. It's gone now. Much of this has been used for scrap. The people have taken parts from these old war relics in the scrap metal trade, or the war scrap metal trade business. It's a dangerous affair because many villagers end up blowing themselves up, picking up live ammunition off this old battlefield. And right over here to our front, you could see where the driver could exit right over here. They were able to drive the tank from there, and over there they had optics where they could see where they were going at. While inspecting this tank, I tried to figure out what disabled it. And as I looked at the turret over here, look at this right here, my friends. This here is a tear. This is a tear here in the metal. So there must have been some kind of round that hit the tank right here on the top of the turret to disable it. And look at this. You can see right over here, there's a hole right over there. There's a hole over there. And if you look at the barrel right over here, you can see the puncture marks or the shrapnel hitting right over here to disable this barrel. So it took some kind of round. It looks like it came in from the top and then down over here, because I don't see any damage right here, so to speak. Well, let me look here. Okay, look at this, the downward motion of the metal over here. So a round probably impacted from here, another round maybe from here, and then again from up there. This tank could have been damaged during an artillery barrage or maybe aerial bombardment. There, look, you can see again 2 more holes in a tank turret. And look at this back over here. You can see the gears that drove the tank right over here. The engine sat right there, and over here are the gears, and back there is the back wheel, and this drove the thread. I'll tell you, this is really fascinating. And look over here also, there's a hole right over here. Again, it has a downward motion, and you can see the metal has ripped and cracked right over here. So whatever hit this tank created a violent motion for sure. Look at this over here. Let's take a look. We're gonna go inside the tank. Okay, look at this. Here's an upward motion. So there was something else, maybe a rocket or a landmine that created this over here. What we're going to do is we're going to go inside this tank. Right over here is where the engine was mounted. Right here you could see where the engine mount is. This is really fascinating. Although much of this tank has been destroyed, there are still some pieces here where you can identify how the tank operated. Again, here are the gears. The engine, the transmission was here, driving it back in there. This drove the threads right here, and back there is the exhaust area. So let's look forward over here. Okay, I'm going under the turret, so to speak. There's the artillery piece. Now you can see the damage on this piece right here. Look at this right over here. Right over here. This is damage right here. You see, this is almost like a scoring over here. So it could have been what's called a B-40 rocket or an anti-tank propelled grenade that hit this. Again, look at this over here. You can see the tearing action that occurred when a round hit this tank. Again, you can see over here how this violent explosion damaged the metal here and eventually disabled this tank. Well, let's go. Oh, look at this. Right over here, we have an ammunition can for a machine gun. It's not here anymore. These tanks had machine guns aside from their main battle guns, so to speak. Again, here you can see the violent tearing motion. And here's, right here, is where the driver sat. And through this copula over here, the optics were right there. He could see where the tank was being driven. But look at this. There's a hole right there. There's a hole right there. There's a hole there and a hole there. So there's a good chance that the people that were in this tank when it was hit probably died. They probably perished. I tell you, these little holes might seem insignificant, but can you imagine the tearing, the searing motion of a round ripping around inside this tank hundreds of miles an hour, and you're sitting inside it? I tell you, it must have been terrifying. Okay, here we are looking at the turret again. And let's take a close look over here. That's the gears. You can see the gears over here that were part of the element that turned this turret here, this main battle gun, so to speak. It could turn all the way this way, all the way that way. I tell you, this tank would have been a formidable weapon if you were an infantryman facing it. But eventually this tank was disabled and destroyed, and more than likely the people inside perished. Well, friends, I hope you've enjoyed our journey to the Phou Keng quarry site and to jar site number 2. Now, in part 1 and 2 of this 3-part series, I've included a lot of imagery of the conflict that occurred here in Laos. Now, my view on this matter is that whether the history is ancient, old, or even modern, it's all very important because it's a portal to knowledge. It gives us an opportunity to reflect upon what happened and to see if there's anything that we can do today or even tomorrow that's better for us. And so I hope you continue to journey with me here in this fascinating place called the Plain of Jars.